Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this session of Insights, where we are going to talk about consumer sentiments, how to measure them, have they been altered significantly because of the pandemic that we are going through the second round? I'm sure it has. And how do we use the sentiments that we understand in building marketing strategies? In my experience of over 3 decades, whatever marketing I have learned, I think there is a lot of ambiguity in terms of what is the difference between consumer behavior, what is the difference between consumer sentiments, are they related to each other, is there a cause and effect relationship, how do you measure, is it important to measure consumer sentiments at all? We talk, whenever we talk consumer, somehow the first thing we think of is FMCG brands. But what about consumer sentiments in a B2B business situation? What about consumer sentiments in a service sector, let's say a hospital marketing or a education institute marketing? So it's a very wide range of emotions that we are talking about, wide range of consumers across diverse industries. And today we are fortunate that we have two experienced people whose life has been around consumers. And they make a very unique combination. Collectively, their experience is in excess of 60 years, a work experience. And if I add mine, I think together we are very close to a century, if not a century itself. I think we are more than a century.
Yeah.
So what we are going to do over this 1 hour is we'll have a free flowing discussion where our experts will try and sort of unveil few things which are practical and which can be applied by any one of us who's here in this group, in this session today at workplace. Let me introduce the two gentlemen first. Let me begin with Mr. Dinesh Jain. He's interestingly positioned himself as a business coach. So I asked Dinesh one day that what do you mean by business coach? I what about executive coach? He says, I coach people to get more out of their businesses. I said, this is very interesting. It's a business coach. Now, Dinesh, before he started his own company, and he's got a very interesting name for his company, he has worked in several, I would say, premier organizations for which we all aspire to work for. It begins with perhaps the mecca of, uh, I think the biggest B school in India, if there is one, is Unilever. He has worked with Unilever. He has worked with media for some time, when he has worked with Z Turner, EDI, what you see on airport out of home media, ABP, which is a print house. He has been the CEO of Nissan, which is an automobile company. Dinesh is very highly educated. I just discovered that he is not only an MBA, he has done his advanced management program in Kellogg, in ISB, he has studied also in IIFT, and most interestingly, his company is Indian Maize Advisor. He believes, and I hope all of us will agree, that Indian market is a maze, and he is here to drive brands and businesses to navigate through this maze successfully. The second person, the second expert on our panel is Dr. Suresh Ramanathan. Dr. Suresh Ramanathan currently is the Dean and Principal of Great Lakes Institute of Management, Chennai. But if I were to use one adjective to describe Suresh, I would say he is courageous. Let me explain why. After doing his graduation from IIT and masters from IIM Calcutta, he worked for many years in India, and that too in very interesting organization. Again, Unilever, Brooke Bond to be specific. He has worked with advertising agencies like McCann, JWT, Lintas. He's the person who launched a brand called MTV in India. He's also worked in research in McCann Erickson, media research before, and then he was married with daughters. He decided that he will do his PhD from Stern School of Business, NYU. It takes a lot of courage to go and study there. After his PhD, where his thesis was around consumer emotions and motivations, it is focused on a role of changing emotions and goals in different domains, such as social consumption of experiences, self-control, and impulsive behavior. Here, there's a enticing bar of chocolate in front of you. I mean, do you succumb to the temptation or not? It's something with Suresh's research, and therefore I'm very scared of him, you know. And then he has taught in University of School, Chicago Booth School of Business, before he shifted to Mays Business School at Texas A&M University, where he held the coveted David R. Norcom 73 endowed professorship in marketing. Suresh has done several programs across the globe, including, of course, Chicago Booth, ISB, and many other places. Thank you, Suresh and Dinesh, for being with us today. Both of you have very busy schedules, and let us try and talk through this entire gamut of consumer sentiments. Let me begin with Professor Suresh Ramanathan. Tell us about your experience, Suresh. And Dinesh, the question you have to also talk about it after Suresh finishes. How your own knowledge about consumers has evolved over these years, and what are the key takeaways that you have got?
So I always used to think that, think of a consumer as a black box. I didn't know what was going on inside the consumer's mind, right? We worked, all of us share a background in marketing. We have interacted with consumers in the field. I have sold tea and coffee in villages in rural Andhra Pradesh, and every time, I encountered people, but I really had no idea what was going on inside their minds. So that black box is fascinating. If you unpack that black box, what you get is something absolutely amazing. Just the kind of feelings that people experience, the different moods they are in, the kind of different attitudes they have, some of which are conscious, some of which are non-conscious. They are not even aware of what is driving their behavior. It's such a fascinating area to study, thinking about who the consumer is, what makes the consumer tick, why do they do the things that they do. It's absolutely amazing. And, this whole area of consumer sentiments that we're talking about today, I mean, it's mind-boggling in terms of, how much complexity there is to this topic. This is a topic on which I think each of us could probably speak for hours together, just discussing, various learnings that we have in interacting with different consumers. But to kind of summarize everything, into one kind of a pithy sentence, all I would say is that, the consumer is your mother, is your brother, your sister, the consumer is everybody around you. And if you understand how they are and how different they are from each other, you have a very, very good appreciation of what is going on in their minds. So this compulsion that we have to treat everybody exactly the same and say, oh, we are talking about segments of customers, we are talking about groups of customers. Every customer is interesting. And that is really what is so fascinating. So,
Dinesh, your thoughts?
Very interesting, Deepak. I'm so glad that you got this particular subject into discussion. And the beauty of this is that as many consumers are there, as many views will be there.
Right. That is true.
So, and what I would say is, and having worked in B2C, B2B kind of companies, one thing that strikes me tremendously is that whether you're dealing with consumer products or services or B2B or B2C, in 999 out of 1,000 cases, you're dealing with people. And whether we like it or not, people behave as consumers of services, consumers of relationships, consumers of goods, and consumers on behalf of somebody else, if not for themselves. Now, this is more in hindsight, but going into the foresight when I started, and that's how I got interested in consumer understanding, was in the very initial stages when one of my teachers, like Professor Ramanathan, he said is, the beauty of consumer behavior is that you are dealing with refraction and reflection both at the same time.
Oh, that's interesting. Hmm.
And he took an example of physics. He said is, part of the light will get refracted that you will see, and part of the light will get reflected that you will not see. And he said is that in order to be successful, you do have to look at both aspects of the light, what is coming to you and what is not coming to you, but you have to understand that. You have to analyze that. And I think that I found to be extremely interesting.
True.
It was fascinating to
Yeah, in fact,
delve
when
into
we
that.
do, it's like when we do the training on communication skills, what we say is it is important for us to understand what is not being said.
Correct.
That's right.
And if you
That's
can
right.
decode that, you will have a better understanding, a higher, better, more effective communication. It's like that refraction and reflection lens thing. One
Absolutely.
of the things which is emerging from both of you that as many consumers, so many point of views, and I believe me as a person could be very different from me as a consumer, possibly, and a consumer, and that too, what I'm trying to buy could define me, my profile as a consumer at that point of time, my behavior as a consumer. Just for the
Right.
sake of all of us, both of you, I request you to talk deeply about the way, how do you define consumer sentiment, and what are the key relevance of consumer sentiments in building marketing strategy? Whoever wants to go first.
Dinesh, why don't you go first?
All right.
Okay.
Thanks very much. See, I'll go back to the basic human brain activity. And where do sentiments arise from? Now, sentiments are actually an output of stimulus received by our systems, our
Right.
processing which is done in the brain.
Right.
So we get a stimulus or a set of stimuli which forces us to do certain things. Now the difference is that human brains are uniquely wired. There is something that happens in between which is processing. Now for the same stimulus or same stimuli, you can have very different responses and very different sentiments. So sentiments lead to a behavior which is based on the processing that each individual's brain does. I'll give an example here, which is a good old mythological example. I'm hungry and I have a very large plate put in front of me, which is empty right now. My mind is processing that I'm going to get a lot of food in that plate. My hunger appetite is built up. And I anticipate that I'm going to eat a lot. Then somebody puts a lot of food in the plate, but says, there is one grain in that which has poison. Now, I'm not told what color is that grain. It is hidden somewhere there. What is going to happen then? Would my hunger overtake my fear of getting ill? Or will my hunger vanish because there is a possibility that there is a poison pill there? Now, this is what leads to sentiments are our interpretation of what is going to happen in future. And that's how things change. That's how we behave very differently. I want to give one specific example of Botswana as a country. And this is in days that I was dealing with liquor industry. Botswana was absolutely devastated with HIV. The average age had come down to 19 years. 19 years. But the per capita consumption of alcohol was one of the highest. There was party on the road every single day. These two are contradictory things. You have people dying like flies with HIV, and you have party on the road every day. And when you ask people, they say life is so uncertain. I don't know what's going to happen to tomorrow. I'm going to party today.
Right.
So
Live for the day.
that's what it is. So this is what I think is that the sentiments are about our own interpretation of what is going to happen tomorrow.
Great. Suresh, your thoughts?
So interesting, and I want to pick up on what Dinesh said. And I want to distinguish between emotion, sentiment. We use all of these interchangeably.
Right.
Okay. So the way I would describe sentiment is that it is some kind of a general feeling that you have without giving it any specific name. It is a general feeling that you have. You feel good, you feel bad, right? About something that is happening or something that will happen. So just want to define it so that everybody gets it. So it's not about sadness or anger or happiness. These are specific emotions. Sentiment is a little more broad. It is more connected to what we might call our general mood state. Okay, how we are feeling right now. Now, where does this come from? And this is where I think the brain, the neuro literature or the neuroscience of this is very useful to think about. Okay, so think about this in terms of there are two aspects of your brain. One is what we would call the rational side of your brain. Okay, it's located right here. Okay, on the side of your forehead, here and here. This area is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It is responsible for all executive function. Anything that you do
is quite
logically.
displayed.
Yeah, it's very, very prominent, Doc, and mine is also getting there. Yeah,
right.
But point being that this is where your logical thinking happens. Okay, picture a chocolate in front of you. Since Dinesh brought up the plate of food, I thought I would bring chocolate to the table right now. You know, it just adds another layer of interest to this discussion. So think about chocolate. Your rational brain, your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, knows how the chocolate tastes. It knows exactly how much calories it has. It knows exactly, how you evaluate the taste of that product and so on. Sorry, 1 second. So it knows everything. Your logical brain knows whether you should have the chocolate or not, right? So that decision is fixed. But there's something else that is going on in your brain. Maybe right now you're feeling a little sad. Maybe right now you're feeling happy. Maybe you're feeling anxious. Maybe there is something going on. You have no idea what emotions you're experiencing, but it is a general negative state. Okay? Generally feeling negative. And at that time, you feel like reaching out for the chocolate and eating it. Okay? Why is it that when we have certain feelings or certain moods, why is it that we eat that chocolate when otherwise we would not eat it? If we were like, rational beings, we might tell ourselves that chocolate is not good for us. We may never have it. But when we are feeling sad or when we are feeling negative, we pick up the chocolate, peel it off and eat it merrily. Why do we do it? The utility of that chocolate is the same regardless of whether you're feeling happy or sad. It doesn't matter one bit what your emotions are. Why do we end up doing this? That is the power of sentiment.
So alcohol also falls into that category, Suresh.
Alcohol, I would say, happy or sad, you have it anyway.
Correct. Whether it's raining or not raining, it is not. Very interesting comment from Arjun. The spectrum is very interesting. I remember the principle of the tipping point, which we often miss. By the way, Sumit, thank you for wishing us and welcome to the seminar. Very interesting that the tipping point which we often miss. Yes, the tipping point is always an important point in life. And there are movies on that tipping point. Hindi movie called Ek Hi Boond, if you remember Jitendra and things like that. This so many years you have worked across various organizations, FMCG, automobiles, media, etc., etc. One or two examples of how you utilized consumer sentiments to create an effective differentiated marketing strategy. Any example from any industry.
Professor, you?
No, that's for you.
That's for you. Okay, if you
Okay,
want
all
to
right.
think, let me ask a
Okay,
question to
no, no, no,
Professor.
no, no, no.
Yeah.
Let me just take two different examples from very different industries, but a common thread in that. First example is this is a couple of decades ago. Lifebuoy as a soap had a very high penetration across economic segments
Yes.
because it was a cheap soap. It was a carbolic soap. It was a cheap soap. Now the classical models of marketing, say segmentation, this, that, da, 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 Lifebuoy would be very difficult to put into a category which was in line with the usage pattern of the brand.
Right.
So I think is that there was a lot of study which went behind to say is that what is that one common domain which is sentimental that can be used for the brand across the segments. Incidentally, in those days, Lifebuoy had 100% penetration amongst the doctors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after everything, they would just go and wash their hands with a Lifebuoy soap.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
that was because it washes off your bacteria 99.9% of the time. So the line that still rhymes in my ears, though in Hindi but got translated to every language, was Tandurusti ki raksha karta hai Lifebuoy.
Right.
So that the sentiment was pure protection.
And the best part is not swasthya, tandrusti. Both are
Tandurusti.
different. Even though if you
Absolutely.
convert them, it is health, right?
It was wellness.
Right.
I'll take another example of space. And this is from the automobile industry. And if you look at in a car, we all look for space, you know, or any physical thing, we look for comfort. Comfort is considered to be similar to space. Larger the space, the more comfortable it is. If you look at airline industry, they say seat pitch 34 inches, 31 inches, 37 inches, seat width 27 inches, 29 inches, 40 inches, whatever it is, and so on and so forth. Now there's a rational part of the brain which says that the bigger the better. So therefore, how do you measure the bigger? It is 34 inches or 37 inches or whatever that measurement is. But we don't really absorb as human beings that what is the difference between 34 inches and 36 inches.
Right.
Very difficult. What we know is that 36 is more than 34 and therefore 36 must be more comfortable.
Right.
So this is about the advertisement of a car which was launched in India, a car called Nissan Sunny.
Hmm.
Now, if you look at a classical car advertising, it is a very engineering dominated, you know, long leg space, comfort, features, etc., etc. And coming from a consumer background of FMCG, we said is that can we convert this physical aspect into emotional, sentimental aspect? And how do we express that? So with a lot of iteration, we said sound can express the length, a little weird. And how do you express that in your communication to communicate that this is more spacious? So we use the word and we use in different situations. Instead of saying that this is sunny car, which has got extra leg space, use the word car as in car. So a owner would say on the phone amongst his friends, driver, कार लेके आओ. Wife looking for keys of the car at home asks her husband, कार की चाबी कहाँ है? So the sentiment of space or comfort or luxury was executed through an expression of elongated sound, though on a logical brain it makes absolutely no sense.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. Brilliant example, Ganesh. Thank you for that. Suresh, I'm sure you will have also number of examples from your career in advertising, marketing, but we must speak about them, of course. But I want you to talk to all of us about your PhD. And you worked on consumer sentiments. And tell us, what are the key things that you want us to learn from what you researched? And that is what we could apply in our day-to-day marketing life.
Yeah, so there are two areas that I actually work on in the context of consumer emotions. And one in particular is fascinating to me, which is what I call shared emotions.
Okay.
That very often, and all our advertising, all our marketing tends to assume that we are people making decisions individually for ourselves. 80% or even more of our consumption of experiences is actually with other people. Whether it's friends, whether it is family, sometimes even strangers. You walk into a movie theater, you're sitting next to a stranger. You walk into a shopping mall, there is a stranger, or it could be someone, someone that you've gone with. How does the presence of that other person and that person's emotions, that person's enjoyment rub off on you?
Wow, that's very interesting.
How do you connect with that other person? How do you then attribute that feeling of connection to the experience? Do you actually enjoy the restaurant a little more if you connected with the person while you were having that meal and you just exchanged a few smiles? Does it actually make a difference?
Is it what happens when you go to watch a live match? That
It happens,
fans
right?
and the shared emotion.
Yeah,
Right.
it's the collective that matters a lot. And even if it is not people you know, it is people who are around you who are infectious with their enjoyment, that it rubs off on you. And the next thing you know, you are kind of, my research basically shows that people actually enter into what we call a shared rhythm. It's almost like you're dancing together.
Right.
Take the analogy of a dance. Okay. You have gone into a dance together. You have two left feet and the other person is also not so good. But somehow magically you put your arms around the other person and you just get into that dance and you get into a rhythm. And when you get into that rhythm, you somehow feel that connection. And how does that connection then subsequently affect your enjoyment of that experience? In profound ways. And that's really what we are, in my research, that is something that I have been exploring. And it can work both ways. It can work in a way where you enjoy an experience in a very different setting. In a project that I'm currently working on, we actually looked at people watching a political debate. In the US, for example, political debates between the presidential candidates are televised. Right. So you have, the presidents kind of debating each other on stage, and you have a panel of people watching the debate. And what we were interested in was actually seeing whether if you're sitting next to someone who actually has a different political view compared to yours, that you are kind of, of a different political persuasion, will that person actually rub off on you in terms of influencing your own attitudes towards the candidate? In other words, even non-consciously, am I actually affected? And again, it turns out that we become a lot more defensive about our positions. Simply sensing someone right next to us who doesn't share the same point of view. We kind of become much more attitudinally distant. So these are all really fascinating areas to study. And so when I talk about consumer sentiment, in this context, I think the idea is it is so huge as an area that, there is both verbal expressions of sentiment as well as non-verbal expressions of sentiment. It's a topic that I think you are going to get to, when we talk about how do we study consumer sentiment, and there is so much, insight that you can bring to bear on this.
There are a few questions which have come up. I'm reading out the questions. You can choose
Sure.
to answer now or maybe towards the end of the session. Somebody who's a visiting faculty of Jaipuria Indore writes, Martin Lindstrom brought similar concepts up way back early during the century. So the question is, what are your views on Lindstrom's approach to the topic? He further brought it up in biology, which we have all perhaps read. And there is an anonymous attendee who's asking, what about consumer sentiment in rural now? Very pertinent questions, very interesting questions. Suresh, Dinesh, would you like to take the questions right away, or would you like to go forward? I think let us just take the next discussion.
Yeah.
When I look
we
at
can come back
India,
to this because I think there are larger questions on this, but yeah, we can come back to this. Yeah.
Sure. When I look at India, I mean, 1992, when Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh did that magic with our Indian economy, 92 to 2000, we really saw a lot of things started happening in India which never happened before that. Like, for example, instead of Doordarshan, along with Doordarshan, we had the cable and satellite televisions, mobile phones that started coming in, and a lot of things opened up, and therefore the connectivity with the rest of the world for our country went up, and suddenly India became a sort of a look forward to type of nation by most of the people across the globe. Then came 2000 to 2010, when if you see the mobile penetration increased, handset prices, I remember that Ericsson had ad which we had in the beginning, and we paid for even getting calls. So a lot of things changed during that time, penetration increased. And post 2010, data, connectivity, internet connection, all have changed. And since last year, early last year, March onwards, I think a lot of people are spending a lot of time on the digital space. How is all this impacting the sentiments and therefore marketing strategies? Question to both of you, whoever wants to.
May I take this first?
Sure, Prof.
Yeah. So it's really interesting if you look at the, how marketing itself has changed in terms of targeting consumer sentiment. There was a time when we used to have ads. All the ad agencies used to create ads that tapped into different types of emotions, right? And so Titan, for example, had ads that tapped into that feeling of love, and all brilliant commercials that that really targeted sentiments and emotions. Let's fast forward to what has changed. Back then, we were talking about marketers or companies or brands speaking to customers. It was never the other way around.
Yeah.
There was absolutely no dialogue that was happening with customers. Today, customers expect to have a say in the brand.
Absolutely.
They expect to contribute. They expect to have some kind of a bi-directional relationship. So the one thing that has changed is a concept that I would say is brand love. Do you actually have it? Do you actually feel that passion or that connection with the brand that you want to give back something to the brand? The vast majority don't. The vast majority of interactions with brands are purely transactional. The vast majority of interactions with brands, that customers have are basically limited to how much of a discount am I going to get. That's the hard and simple truth. There are very, very few brands that are actually connecting with consumers at a much more emotional level. And unless we do that, you will not get what we call advocacy, that they go out and tell their friends about the brand. They don't feel that connection. This is not my brand. I'll give you one simple example of this. Back in the day, there was a research that was done. on the relationship that Mac users, Apple Mac users had with the brand compared to the relationship that PC users had with whatever brand they were using. Okay. It's a complicated methodology. I'm not going to get into the methodology, but I'll summarize the key finding. Mac users were much more likely to say that the Mac is my brand. That sense of connection, this is my brand. I identify with it. With a PC user, you had zero connection. Despite the fact that explicitly both of them, I like the PC, I like a PC, like a Dell or an HP or something. It does the job that I want. It is perfect in terms of functional features. Everything is great. But nobody identifies with the brand. You don't feel that connection. That is what we mean by consumer sentiment.
So
And
Harley
today
Davidson could be another example, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These are all brands that build a connection. Unfortunately, the locus of that connection that people have with the brand for the vast majority of brands in this country and elsewhere has been reduced to kitna discount milega. And that is sad.
Suresh, I will let Dinesh share his thoughts on this. I just want to ask question pertaining to this example that you gave with Mac versus other people. What are the one or two things that Mac has done to create this love, create this connection? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it also, I think there are multiple reasons why this has happened. One is, of course, initially there was a sense of scarcity. So it was not available in large quantities. Very, very few people were using it. Because few people were using it, the people who used it became diehard advocates for the brand because, they felt that connection. They felt like, they were part of a small community. Once you become part of a community, you feel that love because you all kind of are united in that, that expression of love. Then it gets to design aesthetics and all of that, which also, Mac does, Apple does phenomenally well compared to any other brand. So you put it all together and then, you kind of get it from, so it's almost like, you are with it or you're not it, right? Either you get the brand or you don't get it. The same is true about Tesla, right?
Yeah.
So when I was in the US, I owned a Tesla and my God, that car is amazing. It's phenomenal, but you don't get to experience, unless you experience it, you don't realize it, right? The whole idea is that sense of connection that you have, that you have with the brand. And those are connections that are very difficult to build.
Okay, there is an interesting comment which I'll read out, but Dinesh, your thoughts on this subject topic?
I think what has happened is that as marketeers, we've been very slow to pick up the changes that have happened in consumers. Consumers have gone much faster, much quicker than marketeers have. Marketeers tend to believe that they own the brand. They dictate the narrative of the brand.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what has happened is because of digitization, the ownership of the brand, which was always with the consumer, now is forcefully, visibly, audibly with the consumer. I'll go back to the same point which I was saying earlier is, say, for example, Lifebuoy was always known as Lal Sabun. But marketeers said is, I need to push Lifebuoy as a brand. Today, if you look at any brand, and this is not about physical brand, even the virtual brand, consumers in a matter of hours actually will decide whether the brand is going right or wrong as they believe. They will pull down an ad if they think that ad is not appropriate. They will pull down an extension of the brand if they think it is not appropriate. So much so is that today, any OTT platform which has moved from a unidirectional to a bidirectional user-generated content. When I say user-generated content, it could be the response to the posting of the content. They can tear it apart, or they love it so much that they will create their own millions of memes and make it viral.
True. Exactly. So digital has disrupted, if I may.
Complete disruption.
Complete. Okay, before I come to the next topic, there's a very interesting comment by Arjun. He says the classic example of what you are saying, he commented when Suresh was talking, is the way Subway rebuilt its connect. They used consumers to talk to each other and then they started owning the brand.
That's
Like
right.
Subway is where you can pick your what you want inside the salads, and thank you Arjun for the input. But when you're talking of digital transformation, I have two questions back to back. First, since digital has disrupted this connect and communication with consumers, what are the methods of looking at consumers, measuring or identifying consumer sentiment in the digital platform? And other is also through traditional means. That's question number one. Question number two, given that digital is here to stay and it is impacting brands and businesses, what are the key digital transformations that organizations, businesses, and brands must consider if they want to remain relevant and grow in this era? Who will go first?
Dinesh, maybe?
All right.
Finish.
Okay. I just want to start with something which is very basic. Measurement is important, but every measurement is not important.
Very good. Excellent point.
So what everything that can be measured does not necessarily matter. Now, the problem with the digital economy is that the technical people have thrown up so many measures that the marketeer has a big risk of losing into the vanity of a lot of measures.
Good point.
So digital actually makes it even more difficult to take the needle out of the haystack. That's important. Now coming on to what digital is doing. Digital is doing two things very importantly. Number one, it is making your product, brand, service, whatever, available to every nook and corner of the world, irrespective of your language, because the medium communicates visually, if not audibly. I'll give a classic example of what has undergone a change in the last 10-15 years. Today's teenagers across India are far more homogeneous in many ways of, let's say, their dressing. Jeans and t-shirts is a common form of wearing across the country, especially amongst the teenagers. So what it does, it tells the brands that your classic models of supply chain and building a connect with the consumer are no longer valid. If it clicks, you should be able to scale it up very quickly, or you will have a huge consumer disconnect. The second thing that it does, digital, it shortens the cycles. The cycles of communication, the cycles of usage, the cycles of consumer behavior are becoming shorter and shorter. That is what digital is doing. Films are becoming smaller. Now, all of a sudden, you have a plethora of entertainment which is under 5 minutes. And quality. So digital is going to put in a huge amount of pressure to innovate. And unfortunately, innovation is not going to come from larger organizations. And probably we'll come back to that point later. So digital is fundamentally transforming the consumers as they accept things or reject things, and marketeers as they accept that or adapt to that or not.
Okay. Suresh, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'll talk about two aspects of this. One is in terms of, the first point was about what is it that we are measuring. And I completely echo what Dinesh was saying, that not all measures are what you should be measuring. It throws up so many different data that actually may not even be relevant. So how do you make sense of all this is one thing. And sometimes we might be missing out on some things that we should actually be measuring, which we may not be doing right now, right? So I think that is also another aspect to think about. I'll give you one simple example of what we might be missing when we look at consumers who are shopping online in the digital space. One of the most interesting concepts or ideas to think about is what we call decision conflict. How much conflict, right? How much conflict do you feel when you are about to decide? You're not able to make up your mind. You're undecided. You have no idea whether I should go here or I should go there. In the online space, how do you capture that? Is there any way of figuring out, here's a consumer who is kind of undecided. The only way we track indecision is if the customer basically, goes onto an e-commerce website and adds something to the shopping cart and then doesn't go ahead and buy, right? So you've added it to your cart, you don't go ahead and buy it, maybe there is some indecision. But even during the process of evaluating different brands, as you're going through the information gathering process, there is conflict that can be happening in your mind. Is there a way of capturing that conflict? Like, for example, if I were to present, and this could get into more into the market research domain rather than in a practical applied, actually on a website. But in the market research domain, for example, imagine you see two pictures of two products which are very similar to each other. And I were to ask you to basically click a mouse at the bottom of the screen and then take the mouse to one of the two products, right? Indicating which one you have chosen. If your mouse goes in a straight line to the one that you chose, that is indicative that you did not have conflict. But what if your mouse kind of swerves towards the other option before settling on the brand that you actually chose? That is decision conflict. So the deviation from the straight line is indicative of conflict. I'm saying that there are such creative, clever ways of measuring all of these that are actually already available in consumer psychology that marketers can actually apply them. And we are not doing that yet.
Absolutely. In fact, Suresh and Dinesh, I used to consult with a premier leather accessory brand. And I remember just by observing customers, the way they move in the space itself is a measure of consumer sentiments. How much time is this spending? But these are very simple methods of observing to understand sentiments, which we fail often to do it. So I want to ask a question pertaining to your current role. I know there are some people who are in the education space.
Sure.
And you are talking about, and by the way, the number of questions are increasing. So we will have to keep some time at the end of the
sure thing.
for that. It is good. Very lovely questions. We'll come to that.
Yeah.
The education space, right? You have this millennials, and I half the time don't understand. I think there is something beyond millennials also now. People who are born in 2001 and beyond.
Yeah.
So they are a very different breed altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So some thoughts on what are the key things that marketers must remember while marketing any education brand to this audience, which is based on sentiments?
No, I often like to say that this is what I call an attention economy.
Okay.
If you don't grab people's attention within the first 2 seconds, you've lost them. The average duration a Snapchat video is watched online is 2 seconds. By the third second, it drops to less than 20% of the initial audience. If you haven't got them in 2 seconds, you're done. Okay?
That's tough.
That is the battle that we are fighting today. Making things interesting, making things, worthy of debate.
Making
You're
things
fighting for
engaging.
attention. Yeah, and you're fighting for attention with your, with something that is happening on your mobile phone, something that is interesting on WhatsApp. Gone are the days. Of course, I anyway tuned out in class. That is a different matter when I was studying. Regardless of whether we had WhatsApp or not, I was anyway checked out. But today things are very different, right? Today we are fighting for attention with so many different things. And if a professor doesn't make things interesting in class and teaches out of a textbook, we are not challenging people enough. So I often tell my faculty, challenge people, get them to think outside their comfort zone, get them to think creatively, get them to solve problems, not teach concepts or theories. We are not in the business of teaching theories. You can get theory from a textbook any day. Anyone can read the theory and be done with it. There are theories available online through Coursera. Why should you come into my classroom to learn theory? You want to come into my classroom, you want to see how it is applied, how I'm actually forcing you to think out of the box in applying that theory. If you can do that in the classroom, then you will definitely overcome this attention economy. If you cannot, you will be dead.
In fact, that means, Suresh, one of the things which you're saying is very, very important. Getting a student is difficult, but keeping him engaged with you so that he will influence people whom he can depends to a large extent on the way he learns.
Correct.
Because at the end of the day, if the person doesn't learn, what is the point in me teaching? So pedagogy, faculty, etc., becomes very, very important. So what I am gathering from you is to push them, because these millennials can learn anything from the internet, YouTube, online, everything. Why should he come to a physical class and a professor?
Exactly.
Apart from the certificate and degree, of course, which matters.
The beauty of this, Deepak, the beauty of this is their minds are so elastic. They have so much capacity, far more than the capacity that we had growing up. But unfortunately, we are not basically stretching that capacity enough for them to learn what they should be learning. Instead, we teach them something which is regurgitated concepts that were developed probably about 10, 15, 20 years ago by someone sitting somewhere, wrote a textbook, and that textbook is what we teach out of. I mean, just think about it. We have so many examples around us that we can learn from, that we can actually question everything. And I actually, and I shared this with you, I tell my students, don't be afraid to tell me that what you're teaching is bullshit.
But you know what,
I have absolutely no problems about being challenged.
The problem that I am noticing when we are consulting with organizations and we talk of digital transformation, the first thing we speak about is digital responsiveness. And we believe a digital responsiveness is not about technology. It is about an intention. It is about processes, policies, people, attitude.
Absolutely.
Technology is only an enabler. If that comes last, as a business owner, if you don't want to be digitally responsive, you are doomed. Dinesh, you have seen FMCG and you have seen automobile. Very different consumer path to purchase in terms of value, the decision making. I mean, what can both these industries learn from each other in terms of consumer sentiments?
I would say quite a lot, but still, there is a lot which could be learned by either side is not learned.
How to learn? Correct.
So it's strange that only if we know what we know, that's a big issue both within the organizations and across the industries, across the organizations. Now, FMCG as an industry is very observation focused. Observe consumers, observe behaviors, observe instances, observe situations, very observational in nature. Whereas if you look at automotive industry, it is very engineering, very R&D, very improvisation, very what I should call is efficiency oriented one. And I'll again go back to some of the golden lines which I picked up in very early part of my life, working life, when one of my salesmen under whom I trained, he said is, everybody doesn't buy soap for cleaning, but if you don't have cleaning, you will not sell soap.
Correct.
Similarly, I would say is
And
not.
sorry, Dinesh, cleaning is a feeling. It's
Yes.
not measured in any other way.
No,
You feel that
it
you're
is feeling. It is feeling. Similarly, is that nobody buys a car because it can transport from place A to place B. That is given. So I think there is a lot that can be understood from each other. I'll give another example of a great automotive change of thought from engineering to a consumer-driven mindset. There was this company which launched its a car in India, and it had, like all cars, it had A, B, C, D, 4 models. But they said is, models are pure performance. People buy a car for performance. The car will look more or less the same from outside. There's nothing to distinguish from model A versus model D, where the price difference could be almost 30%. And consumers rejected that concept because they wanted to demonstrate that I'm driving model D, which is 30% more expensive. So there has to be a visible differentiation. Absolutely. Which is a very FMCG oriented mindset, is that there has to be something which is visible not only to me, it is visible to the entire world. Again, I'll go back. Especially, this is more so in Asia, where we are like peacocks. We love to showcase our feathers.
Nice one.
So I would say is equally, FMCG industry has a lot to learn from automotive industry in terms of getting the basic engineering right. Our packaging in FMCG in terms of stability, in terms of durability, in terms of environmental consciousness sucks. Pardon my words. There's a lot that can be learned from that. And it is all available for free. It's just that we don't learn from that.
And today's generation is extremely this sustainability, environment conscious, much more than we were. Suresh, I think you are eager to share few thoughts, and I can sense it in your body language. If you could
No, I'm good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Shall we take the questions? Suresh, we'll take the Martin Lindstrom question. Would you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, no, I got that. So yeah, the question on Martin Lindstrom. Yeah, there are numerous people who have written about all these topics. There are the field of consumer psychology is very, very rich, and it goes back probably more than 100 years. There are several theories that have that have been advanced about the power of emotions, the power of non-conscious processes. Martin Lindstrom has talked about how we might get influenced by things which are outside of our control. All of that is known. I think what he does is different from what others do in terms of their approach to the research. And the way I look at it, everything has to be backed by data, and painstakingly gathering data to ensure that what you're saying is actually backed up by solid evidence is really what this is all about. And so much of what we are talking about today is based on evidence that has come up in the last probably 15, 20 years, particularly the things that I discussed about neuroscience, very, very, very little was known about neuroscience till very recently, and how it actually applies to consumer behavior.
Exactly.
So some of these concepts are very new. They may have been discussed in the abstract by others, but ultimately it is all about data.
Even
Absolutely.
behavioral economics, if you see, as
Yeah.
in Kahneman and things. Dinesh, what is your idea about this consumer sentiment in rural now?
I think is that pandemic has brought about one significant change, and the change is that it has taken us back to what I call is back to basics. If I was to simplify and put it, if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy, it has taken us to the basic physiological safety and belongingness level much higher than what I call is the esteem and self-actualization. Another example, what I would say of how I look at my safety and my physiological needs is the fact that when the pandemic came, people were so paranoid about survival. They said is, I'm willing to spend more to have my personal transportation. So whether it is a new car or a second-hand car market actually is boomed. So if you look at the rural area also, the whole concept of helping each other, collaborative efforts, etc., is going through a very big change. I'll give you a classic example of what happened last year when there was a huge amount of migration. Every village, okay, exaggeration, but a lot of villages that I have come to know in UP, MP, and Bihar. That's what where my area of interaction was. Villagers actually put up isolation homes outside the village limits, where people coming from urban areas had to quarantine themselves, and the villagers gave them food, etc., etc. But protect the turf to say is that I need safety, but equally I need to take care of them.
That's interesting. I mean, I to me this is new thing which I learned, and I think for the first time in the second wave, the rural population is little more impacted in terms of the virus, and that may have a different impact. There is
That's
a very
right.
specific question. What about consumer sentiment on plywood now? I'm sure Suresh and Dinesh will throw some light. I have seen that plywood advertising is now talking of germ-free, virus-free. That's
Yeah.
another overkill which is happening. Anything from tiles to plywood to cement bags, everything is virus free. And people are just claiming it. I don't know whether ASCI is doing that role. How is it being virus free? I really don't know. But I think
Yeah,
this is again riding one wave, everybody is on the same wave. And that
yeah,
is what marketing is. Anyway, Suresh and Dinesh, if you have any
yeah.
idea about what is
No, it
happening in
is.
plywood.
I continue to be appalled by some of these claims. It just boggles my mind to see how people jump onto a bandwagon making unsubstantiable claims. That you cannot even support, or even if you can, it doesn't matter one bit. Why how does it matter whether the blades of a fan are virus free? I mean, I really don't get it.
Dinesh, your
I,
thoughts?
yeah.
I'll touch upon a slightly different aspect of for the plywood industry. This work from home for large part of our population actually has led to a situation where people are seeing part of their home as equal to office.
Correct.
When I say as equal to office, I'm expecting a similar kind of feel, touch, quality, etc., etc. So, for again, some part of the country, especially North India, and a little bit of urban areas of South India, there's been a huge amount of upgradation or refurbishment at homes.
Correct. And you have to create spaces, the same space
Absolutely.
you need to bifurcate for this thing.
Absolutely. So I think is that home improvement actually has been a big gainer because of the pandemic and largely because people are spending more time at home, which they would not earlier.
Yeah,
Great.
If I can just jump in and add some data to this, actually, we have been studying Indian households for the past 2 years, pre-pandemic to now, and we have the same. It's a panel data, so we have a longitudinal study of the same households over time. And what we found very interestingly is that purchase of white goods has gone up significantly.
Yes.
Right now. And
True.
labor saving, obviously, it has obviously impacted. Therefore, your maids and all of that. People have actually cut back on maids, and purchase of washing machines, dishwashers, refrigerators. All of these things has actually gone up, right? And very interestingly, another corollary to that is that people's savings have gone down. So they have actually spent more during this time. Their savings have gone down because their income has suffered. And very, very ironically and sadly, the first thing that has given way during the pandemic is your life insurance.
Paradoxical.
So people have surrendered their life insurance precisely at the time that they should have actually retained it, because most people actually don't even have insurance now. And I really don't know how this is actually going to unfold, but it is saddening. Only 20% of people in the small traders, business class, they have life insurance now. 1 in 5 people has life insurance. Earlier it used to be 60% plus. That's
health
how bad
insurance penetration may have gone up because of the pandemic. I don't have the numbers, but I presume it must have gone up. Next question is from Mahua. There are two, after this, 2 more questions. She represents a company called ICA, which is the Vocational Training Institute. When we are talking about consumer behavior, India being youngest nation of the world, is there any change in customer behavior in millennial when it comes to rural millennial and urban millennial? Is there any difference in sentiments? Good question.
Interesting. I think is that there is one commonality between the two, but there is one big differentiating factor. The commonality is that the desires are similar.
Right. Aspirations
are similar. The difference is because of the affordability, etc. The consumption, latent consumption or latent need will go up very significantly. So what I would say is the explosion as and when things improve in the rural areas for the items which are not sold in the past will get sold at the cost of savings.
Correct.
Suresh, anything you would like to add?
No, I think, Dinesh is absolutely right. I think I firmly believe, and I'm talking about this from a more theoretical angle rather than because I don't have, it's been a very, very long time since I have, dealt with the Indian consumer, in the field. But from a pure psychological standpoint, there are certain basic things, basic sentiments or basic emotions that we all have. We all have the same reasons why we feel angry. We all have the same reasons why we feel sad. We all have the same reasons why we have desires, right? So getting to the point about desires, the needs that we have, the desires that we have, these are now, they kind of share a common substrate that, it all comes from the same area of the brain. And therefore, the only thing that is different is the ability to actualize those desires. And that is partly access, as Dinesh rightly said, it's access, affordability, all of these things matter. But also, I think it boils down to competing priorities. What else do you need to spend this on? Can you really, afford to splurge on something when you have other things that you want to also focus
on? Conflict of decision making.
That is right, right? So presumably, and again, this might need to be backed with data, but urban millennials may differ in their level of conflict compared to rural millennials.
The next question is from Chandan. Very interesting. This is a longish question, but I think what he is asking is very pertinent. The marketeer during the non-digital, when we have the unidirectional way of communication, The communication used to be organic to the brand. However, during this digital phase, the communication is easily influenced by many noises that are visible. The question is, do you see that there is a higher risk of the organic brand communication getting distorted very easily, and what are the ways to keep the check? Wonderful question, Chandan.
Super
Good question. Yeah, that's a good question. So let me take a stab at it, and then Dinesh, I think you can also do it. But my reasoning on this is simple: that this is something that is inevitable, in the sense that once you embrace this idea that you're going to have consumers contributing something back to the brand in terms of feedback, in terms of input, whatever you call it, you cannot try to influence it in any way as a marketer. You have to basically recognize that this is what it is, and then handle it in the sense of, how do I then make sure that my brand is more responsive to it? I think consumers appreciate responsiveness. Consumers appreciate a brand that actually listens. And if consumers, know that, no matter what the feedback, the brand is actually going to respond. Take, for example, things that consumers post on Twitter. There is negative feedback that might be posted. And there are very, very interesting, there are some great brands, even in India, that are very, very spontaneous in the way they respond to that consumer feedback. They are humorous. They kind of, engage with the customer in a way that it diffuses the situation. The more we become defensive about things, and we say that, here are a few voices that are negative, and then, we therefore need to then respond to them negatively, it creates a spiral. And once you go down that path, it's a rabbit hole. There is absolutely no getting out of it. So marketers cannot try to do things or try to take control of things. That cannot happen. Marketers can definitely try to basically channelize the debate in a way, or the discussion in a way that it diffuses the situation. And I think that's the best that can be done in a situation. But Dinesh, go ahead.
Dinesh?
I think it's absolutely right, Professor Ramanathan. The only additional layer that I would put it is, in such times, it is very important for the marketeer to stick to the brand purpose. And once you are very clear about the brand purpose, then it's easy to modulate. At the same time, one has to be very clear is that you cannot please every single person.
Absolutely.
Can we have a noise reduction mechanism instead of a shrill address the issue?
Right. In fact, I'm reminded of two things. When we do training, we say that when there is a negative stimulus, please do not react to the stimulus, respond to the stimulus.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Because if you react negatively. And the second thing, I remember I was doing a training for a managerial staff of a hospital. And I was asking that, my first question was, as a customer service team, what is your primary task? Everybody in the audience said to take care of a problem as soon as it happens. So I said, fine, I agree with you. Look at it differently. If you take your primary task is that I will prevent problems from taking place, you don't have to firefight every time. It's all about proactivity. It is all about transparency. It is all about honesty. There's no harm in it. Nobody expects anybody to be perfect. And that's very important. But by the way, questions are going up one by one.
But just on this, I have one more point.
Sure.
One of the biggest complaints that the consumers have is meri kisi ne suni nahi, nobody heard me of.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing that you can have.
Absolutely. So hearing by itself takes away the big punch.
True. Okay. A gentleman called Subroto Rana, who's a behavioral economist, he asks a question: what would be the strategies for marketing public goods? Suresh and Dinesh.
Define public goods for me.
Okay, Shubhroto, please type out the definition of public goods and then we will pick it up from there. All right, Dinesh Pani has, is it possible to combat the habitual brand by digital sense for startup products, sir? I am unable to understand the
No,
question.
I didn't get it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Dinesh, if you could just type out little more to see what it is. One question which is for Suresh, from the person who has written back in Jaipuri and Indore. I'm reading it out. Guys may not do enough research before coming to class. This is talking about people like you and me, Suresh. Okay. Hence, how do they get content, but does it apply across quality of students? One can understand this among IIMs, but does it apply to grade 10? I guess it needs to be modified depending on the past behavior of student.
I kind of disagree. I disagree with this idea that it depends on the quality of students.
Correct.
I completely disagree with that idea. I think it depends on the quality of the faculty.
Absolutely right. I ditto your sentiments because what stimulus the student has to respond to determines his response.
Yeah.
And
faculty comes into a classroom without creating a plan which actually will engage those students. The students are going to tune out. No matter whether you're good quality or bad quality, a student will tune out. So it completely depends on the faculty, not on the student. The onus is on the faculty to engage the students. The onus is not on the students to pay attention.
Great. Achha, Shubhrata has defined public. So, Dinesh, would you like to add to this?
All right. Can you just read out what Shubhrata said?
Shubhrata is public goods, a commodity or service that is provided without profit to all members of a society, either by the government or by a private individual or organization. So not for profit.
Yeah, I think the sense of ownership, the sense of responsibility and collective good being, which again goes back to the purpose.
This question is, what are the strategies for marketing?
I'm coming to that. So what I'm saying is that as long as we get the purpose right, the work will be done much easier. For example, instead of saying that here are 4 loaves of bread for everybody, if the marketing strategy could be is, can we lessen the hunger, pain in the people? Somebody will need 1, somebody will need 2, somebody will need 6 loaves of bread. So as long as we are very clear in our communication for public good, this is what I call is the difference between equity and equality. Equality is giving everybody 4 loaves of bread. Equity is give where it is needed more.
Equitable.
Public good is all about equity.
So the vaccination should be distributed equitably. If depending on
I was going to not talk politically, but I would say is that the places where we have huge amount of suffering, I would put disproportionate amount of vaccination in those areas so that it doesn't spread out of that and gets controlled there.
Yeah.
Suresh, your thoughts on this public goods?
No, I completely agree with that. I think the two comments. I think one is, of course, that the moment you're saying it is, you're doing this without a purpose of profit, and it is a non-profit, and it is meant to serve the larger public, it is basically predicated on a very different principle compared to how normal businesses run, right? And when you have that, the main thing that you have to focus on is the larger purpose that that you're trying to fulfill through this. What is the broad meaning behind why you're offering this? I'll give you one example of this. I'm in the education space, and if I were to simply think of my purpose as attracting students to my institute over other institutes, getting them a job, and then they leave after a year or 2 years, depending on which program they attend, I'm not doing justice to the purpose with which this institution was founded. The purpose of this institution was to actually transform students fundamentally into better quality leaders with a social purpose.
Precisely.
Right? And are we in the business, and take all of education in India, and education is a public good in that sense, take all of education. how much emphasis do we place on ethics? Are we actually turning out ethical business leaders, ethical engineers? The instance of unethical behavior is so profound. And so I would just say that, ultimately the purpose of education is to transform you into a better human being. More than get you a job, it is to transform you into a better human being. If you are able to accomplish that, or at least make some kind of progress towards that goal, I think that would be really what we should be talking about. How do we transform people? So as a marketing strategy, I don't want to talk about the jobs that you get.
Dinesh, would
You'll
you like
get
to
those.
say?
Yeah.
Deepak, I will take a real life example of something that happened to me about 3 months ago, which is public good by for-profit business. I was visiting a particular bookshop, and as I was entering outside the bookshop, there was a rack which was put there, and there was a small little poster there which said is, leave the books here that you have read and take the books that you want to read.
Wow.
No cost. And that shelf was full. And out of curiosity, and I went in and I said, is that, hey, you got all these books lying there. Many of these titles are also you're selling. Don't you think it'll eat into your business? The guy had a good, nice, gentle laugh. He said, I'm the business of building a reading habit and not in the business of selling books.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I want to answer Dinesh's question, Dinesh Mani's question on, if I understand it. I think
Correct.
My sense of, startup companies today that are, in the digital space, particularly, how do they overcome the, the challenges of, that one ad looks the same as the other. You take, for example, ads by startups like Upgrad or I mean, there are so many startups, all of whom they use celebrities, and it's a very, very common formula that they use. Feature one celebrity, and you have one random endorsement, and that is it. And the one example that really sticks in my mind is the example of Cred. If you've seen the advertising, it is absolutely brilliant. Okay. It uses a celebrity, but uses it in a way that it is almost like a parody of all celebrity advertising. Okay. It engages. You take that, that whole Rahul Dravid campaign that, that ad that they ran featuring Rahul Dravid having anger issues. I mean, it just became such a powerful talking point. Everybody started talking about the brand. So the point I'm saying is, making here is that brands, even in the digital space, are often guilty of resorting to what I would call creative laziness.
I love this stuff.
Absolutely.
Creative laziness is get a Virat Kohli or an Akshay Kumar or someone, put them into the ad without any kind of meaning whatsoever. You just throw them into the ad, have absolutely no integration into the plot. And you can substitute one celebrity for another and your plot will exactly be the same. No difference whatsoever they make. We don't even test it. We just see, let's throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
Sudesh, I have two thoughts to add to what you said.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it is the creative agency who takes a safe formula.
Yeah.
Right? And more importantly, I think it is the brand custodian or the brand owner. What is his outlook towards advertising and branding?
Yeah.
And I give that example of that pug in that Hutch campaign, where it must have taken a lot of courage for the marketing head of Hutch to show no phone, no tower, one kutta running all over the place, and it was so memorable. So I think the brand owners lack that gut to do something which is very, very different, because It takes a lot of money to do it, and then if it is
Yeah.
wasted, then you are done. When you guys were talking about this question which Shubhrata raised about uh, the public goods, the one you narrated, Dinesh, wonderful example of the goods, and Suresh, which you spoke about education. I just want to mention something which we have started recently, and I'm very excited about it. We are partnering a school in a place called Khanusa in Gujarat called St. Joseph Schools. And this school has been following the sustainability model of UN since ages.
Hmm.
Oh,
So
wow.
we are trying to take their message to the rest of the world, and the purpose is not to get more students. Purpose is to influence more children and more schools to look at sustainability as a part of the process of child's development inside school. If we can achieve that, I think we would have achieved a very important goal for the brand. That brand purpose, the marketing objective has to be very, very, very clear. I think we've spent 1.5 hours. At least I didn't realize that it has gone. And if I look at the number of participants when we started and what they are, I don't think too many have dropped off. They may have dropped off, not a lack of interest, but maybe because of some other commitments. Any last thoughts from Suresh and Dinesh on the topic that we discussed before we close?
Go ahead,
I
Dinesh.
would only say is that marketeers, uh, consumers are like sunlight. Every single moment they are changing. Don't get stuck at a place and assume that you know what you knew by observing consumer yesterday. Today is a new day, new reality. In the digital world, it is changing even faster.
Yeah. And I will take that analogy forward, and I'll say that consumers are cognitive misers. They don't want to think unless they really have to. Okay, they don't want to think, so don't assume that they want to think. Assume they want to feel. And the more you are able to understand what they feel, the more likely is it that you're going to connect with those customers. So yeah,
please, Suresh, please complete your sentence.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that, understanding consumer sentiment is therefore very important, because too often we celebrate the logical mind of the Indian consumer particularly, but the Indian consumer is also amazingly emotional, and yeah.
One question has come in, and I have to ask it because I think it's a very interesting question by Amit Datta. Sometimes we found that when a consumer is ready to buy a product, but customer is preventing him to purchase that because he didn't use the brand before. For example, son wants to buy a Royal Enfield, but father is saying that you buy it Bajaj Discover. Interesting. Consumer versus customer. So what do you do in that case? Last thoughts on this question before we close for the day.
Oh, this happens all the time.
Yeah.
It is a persuasion, because the measurement of the benefit of the product stroke service by the two stakeholders are very different. If there's a convergence, they will agree on the same thing. If there's a divergence, they will not. It happens is, when life insurance is sold as investment, if you buy that logic, you will buy it. If you know what it is not, then you'll say, sorry, hang on. There has to be commonality of approach. I'm buying insurance for risk cover and not for investment.
So, Suresh, your thoughts?
No, I think, as Dinesh rightly said, this is an age-old issue, right? There are multiple decision makers in a household. You have to understand what drives each person, what are their motivations, and if you need to influence another decision maker in this process, you design communication that is appropriate for that, so long as you know that there is a role that person plays in this decision process.
Deepak, I'll just add on to something. Children are very smart. They know if I can't convince the dad, I will convince the mom, and mom will get it done.
Yeah, exactly.
So the decision making thing. I picked up 3 words, and I think I will try and apply it to the consulting that we do. First is that it's the black box. Suresh began with it. Consumer is the black box. When an aircraft crashes, unfortunately, you hunt for the black box, because that is where you get to know what actually happened. It's like that, the black box. The more you can dive into it, understand it, we can do it. Second is the concept which Dinesh spoke about, reflection and refraction. I think we both are important. What is seen and what is not seen. What is felt, what is not felt. And you know what, Suresh, is that feelings. It's I think that feelings that we need to understand, which makes it more important for us as marketeers. And the most important one is that this is an attention economy. I know we are pushing your attention by this 1.5 hour long session. I will not risk that. Attention is very short. So basically, it is about brevity of communication. And if one cannot, it's like I go back to Prezi writing in school, which we learned, and brevity of communication, if the communication can engage, and there are digital platforms for that, I think we have a winning strategy. Dinesh and Suresh, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom and expertise. All of you attended. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope we have added some value to your knowledge, some value to what you wanted to know. If any of your friends you feel have missed this session, this will be available on our YouTube channel, Ideas Consulting Group, in a couple of days' time. Please feel free to share the link. Every month we will meet on Insights with new topics which we feel is relevant and where there certain things need to be uncovered for the benefit of everybody who attends it. Thank you so much. Stay
Thanks
safe.
very much, Deepak. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Stay safe and good evening to all.
Yeah. Take care.
Take care.